Sudha ma'am, Akshay sir, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to JarXchange.
Thank you very much
Pleasure
for
to be here.
making us feel old as well.
I didn't know how I did that, but okay. So for people who don't know, let's start with your story. So I'll start with you first, ma'am. What's been your journey, your career, and that one point where you decided to take the plunge into the social sector?
For me, it was turning 40. I had spent 17 years post B school in the tech industry. Very wonderful stint at Intel, where I at one point thought I would retire there. And then in the mid 2010s, we saw a very noted change in the direction of technology in the world. That was, in the early days of AI, on the horizon, this very distinct possibility that technology, which had served the human condition, helped us to accelerate the pace at which education was reaching children, healthcare was reaching remote parts of the country and the world, and generally seen as in service of humanity, was starting to also show that it can be a source of man-machine conflict. And that created, this dissonance. The best technologists were working to accelerate income inequalities, the 2% problem becoming a 1% problem, now a 0.5% problem. Whereas technology itself had the power to improve the human condition. The same tech that is taking wonderful footage of weddings and scenic videos through drones could be supplying blood and medicines to Arunachal Pradesh, right? I mean, the use cases are there, but people are needed to kind of bring those use cases to life and use technology to serve humanity. I was starting to kind of think along these lines and had on paper a B plan to start up. And then a common friend suggested that I meet Atul Satija, who'd already started up the Nudge Foundation at that time. The Nudge was a year old back in 2016. And I think he had me at hello. I kind of junked the B plan. He'd already started this wonderful initiative to improve employability of youth who had been let down by a poor quality of education and were otherwise not employable in the formal sector. And these short format skilling programs were their means to acquire a skill that would give them a job at the end. I saw the team, early team members, some of whom are still at the Nudge. There was a certain energy in this non-profit, which was more like a startup in any other domain. They were over here at HSR. No difference between this team and what you might have found at Ola or Flipkart or anywhere else. In the 7.5 years since, one of the best decisions of my life.
Got it. I haven't had the chance to meet Atul, but as I was telling you, in 2017-18, I had applied for a job there in
you
marketing.
Said you also had applied at Give India, which is the other organization.
I applied at Give India. I had an email from Atul. I was trying to find it before coming here. Before coming here.
Yes, he has two hats.
Yeah. So tell us about your journey, Akshay.
Some similarities, but it's a little more by accident than Sudha's, which was fairly by design. So,
accident by design.
Yeah, so in her case it is by design. In my case, a little more accidental. So part was 40, because I think in sometime in the 12th standard I had promised a bunch of friends that I would basically retire at 40. Get married at 28, have a daughter at 30 and retire at 40. I stuck to retiring a few months before my 40th birthday. I was dead tired of the financial markets. So quit, moved bag in baggage from Bombay to Bangalore and just chilled out for a year, relaxed. Then daughter started going to full school, so I needed something to do. I was starting to get bored. And when I looked around, the Nudge flashed up on LinkedIn. I was looking, by the way, at private equity and the Nudge together.
Okay.
So in that sense, that's what I'm saying by accident. It did strike a chord in the sense that it was about livelihoods, which I felt was which is something I'd been discussing for years. I'd been arguing that instead of a demographic dividend, we're heading for a demographic bomb if we don't create enough jobs, because manufacturing, we're a services-led growth economy, right? So I'd spent years focusing on that, spending time on that. And therefore it struck a chord. Came in, caught up with a variety of people, finally Atul, and then started up. So I came in because it felt like this was something I'd never done before, and it would be really interesting to solve for. Came in, and as Sudha said, around in a house, in a garage, there was one table around which
literally a garage.
The six of us sat, very startup-y.
This is which year? 2017 again?
This is 2018.
18, okay.
6 years back. A quarter more and 6 years will be up. And basically, there was someone from Intel, there was someone from Yahoo, there was someone from private equity, and then there were 2 TFI grads, fully dyed social sector, right? So it was a completely interesting environment. I saw people like myself and felt, you know what, I want to try and take a punt on this. So for the first 6 months, I basically ended up on assignment, working for free, because I wanted to see whether I want to spend my next 10, 20 years doing this. And, while I didn't get in for the impact, I've stayed for it in terms of the difference that I have seen our work has made. So,
how's the retirement going now?
My wife and daughter complain that I never worked as hard in investment banking as I do in the social sector. So, so in that sense, clearly that's not working.
Yeah, for anyone listening out there that thinks this is a halfway point between full-time work and retirement, bad
You're
news.
Yeah.
Does one need to be financially settled to take a plunge into the social sector?
So I think it comes, typically I see 2 kinds of people in the social sector. So let me answer it based on what exists today. One is youngsters who are driven by impact, who come in to want to solve, full of passion. They work in the sector for a while, and typically about the early 30s is when they look to see if they can go out on some money. But we get a pretty decent phase of time from them, and they spend a lot of their energy on the sector. And the other set is the ones who raise the age, like myself, who end up here after having made some money. So is some level of financial security necessary? It's also a question of wants, right? Very, very, to be fair, it's a question of what is enough. I have, when I quit Morgan Stanley, I remember someone telling me, you must have made a ton of money. And I was thinking that person's stock options for the last year were more than my entire net worth. So it wasn't, it's a question of what's enough. But traditionally, as of now, that's what we see. Either people who are young and driven and passionate, sticking for a while before trying to go out to make some money, or people who've made some money, have some level of financial security, and then coming in.
Got it. You've written that for people who know you, you don't like to be recognized, but congratulations on getting the BW Social Impact Award, Akshay.
Thank you.
When was the average age in your organization?
It would be the late 20s, early 30s.
Do I need to be very settled in life to join the social sector?
So, if you look at just compensation, the social sector will not be competitive in a marketplace for talent. Right? Any other sector would pay more. And I'm not even saying financial services, Morgan Stanley kind of sector. Even, FMCG or any other banking, any other industry would pay more than the social sector does. It's absolutely at the bottom. But if you stack up compensation plus a sense of purpose and the joy of working with optimistic people who want to devote their lives to something bigger than just pursuing their own personal financial goals, that adds up quite nicely, right? Because I think a lot of what you get out of working in the social space is a sense of applying your skills and strengths to something that's a purpose bigger than any one of us individually. That said, it is still a binary choice, right? You do good for the world or you do well for yourself. I think in the 7 years that I've been around, I have seen the shift in salaries in the social sector starting to adjust to not forcing this binary choice. Early days of social work, right? If you kind of look at the pre-CSR era, where older organizations like Pradhan or Pratham that started in that period would have struggled so much more to attract talent with very little assurance of a revenue flow, right? Of an inflow of money, while being in the ground attacking a problem that's growing much faster than the solutions themselves, right? Very, very difficult period for nonprofits. What we've seen in recent times is a modest but steady growth, of course, helped with CSR law, with that one big spike that we had that continues to help, but also growth of domestic philanthropy. It's no longer just about volunteering, right? You can have a career in the social sector. There's also an increase in the kind of roles in the social sector, right? What started as charitable work, again, based on volunteering, has now morphed into acute problem solving. So now you need technologists, you need specialists with, skills that actually help to solve these problems at scale. One of the things that young people do consider when making these choices. And the fact that now it comes with a salary, I think, is making it better. Still a very long way to go.
But things
you
are getting
still
better.
need to make a sacrifice, but at least the prospects are there.
Got it. So we'll talk about this in detail. Now so the Nudge Institute works towards a poverty-free India. Can we understand the magnitude of the problem? There are different numbers that I was reading, but just give us some sense of what's the scale of the problem in India when we say that there are X number of poor and ultra-poor in India.
So the last official data on poverty comes from the SECC report of 2011, which calls out 23 million households as in extreme poverty in this country. And extreme poverty is defined as having 3 or more deprivations. Deprivations listed as not having access to a steady income, no adult in the family being employed, woman-led household, poor baselines of nutrition, children not in school, right? And if you have 3 or more of even access to water and sanitation, those kind of things. If you have 3 or more of these deprivations, you're ultra poor. In this country, it currently lands somewhere in the 30 to 40,000 rupees per year kind of income.
For a household.
For a household. And the density is highest in the middle states of the country.
Okay.
Right? Poverty beyond this extreme poverty, which is more prevalent in tribal and rural India, is very, very complex and multidimensional. Right? If you look at urban poverty, you may find that the income levels are higher, as in you might even be making more than 80,000, maybe a lakh of rupees even. But your support systems are few, so you're spending far more on child care or elder care. You probably are spending money on water far more than you and I spend, right? The outflows are forced and the shocks are deep. So if you fall sick, for instance, and there's no social support system, what you spend on healthcare is much higher than if you'd stayed back in your village. So the complexity of this whole space makes it very difficult to put numbers on how many people in India are poor. So we've generally taken the view of not expending too much calories on defining poverty or coming up with a threshold. We're saying anyone in the bottom 20-30% of the country that has barriers to achieving their life's potential. Right? If the kid has to drop out of school and not pursue their passion in, say, becoming an architect, they're poor.
Good. What does it take, Akshay, to get a household or a family out of poverty? I know it's not a simple answer, but let's just start somewhere.
Sure. So just like it's multidimensional as a problem, the solution would end up being multidimensional, right? You basically got to solve for a variety of things that lead to poverty. As an example, health shocks is one of the things Sudha was speaking about. Typically, that means you need water, you need sanitation, that needs to be cleaned, right? Because if you've got a job and you're actually drinking dirty water, you've got cholera, you've lost your job, you need to go to hospital, and you're banged down in the slide of poverty again. So you need to solve for that, you need to solve for education, you need to solve for employment, or at least an income, right? That might come through employment, might come through entrepreneurship, but whichever it is, but there needs to be a sustained income. You need to solve for some level of social security, because the government's actually brought out a bunch of schemes over the last 10 years, right? But access to them is still not necessarily for the last mile. It is still not necessarily as good, right? Like we work with waste pickers in Bangalore as an example. Basically, the ones that are routing through my waste and your waste, because globally, even people say employed by BBMP are classified as waste pickers, right?
Okay,
the poor karmikas who you see in uniform sweeping up in the morning, but we don't work with them because from a strata perspective, they're actually much better off than the ones that we work with.
Got it. So you can say the unorganized sector.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So we work with them, and we realized that a lot of them did not have waste picker cards, which meant that they were unable to access most of the government schemes. Then there is the entire migrant problem into cities, which again means that you have to get access to that. Otherwise, you can't get your typical rations, etc. All of that becomes potentially challenging, right? So you're not able to take access, even though there is infrastructure. So you have to build that extra. Education, definitely. And per se, all of this has to be supported by, at the end of the day, it has to be agency, because capacity building is critical. Again, in the social sector, we're focused on what is the sustainability, right? And sustainability is after you exit the population, what portion of the intervention stays alive and what falls away. So what falls away is not truly impact, right? It's only what portion stays in there, which is critical. And that's why agency and capacity building, so that they're able to live on by themselves. The org should not be consistently following up and doing it for them.
So you mean that people who come out of the poverty line should actually be there and sustain there?
Should be able to sustain above the poverty line, and they can, not if I am guiding them, but more if we have managed to actually imbibe in them how to think about it, right? How do I think about changing a job is a process. Typically, you and I will have done it very well in Excel sheets, but how they think about it is very different. Even as an example, when we work with entrepreneurs, we've created about 200 odd women, 202 women who are entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs, and we realized that they thought of cash flow as income. There was no working capital concept, right? So you have to go back and you have to create that. Otherwise, once that support is gone, it'll fall through. That should not be happening.
This is one of the questions that came in, that is education the holy grail of alleviating poverty?
So poverty alleviation does require an investment. Think of it as build-up of human capital, right? And of course, education is a big part of that build-up. Not just education from the standpoint of making someone employable, but like Akshay said, in building agency, right? What that means is a strong foundation of social emotional learning, right? Ability to navigate life through robust life skills. And then, of course, the learning in terms of basic literacy, numeracy, digital literacy. A large part of what the future shows as, residual poverty comes through digital exclusion if you're on the other side of the digital divide. So digital literacy is an essential part of education now if you're to avoid that future. Beyond all of the build-up of the human capital is the access to opportunities. So education is necessary, but not important. Access to opportunities is a changing game. In this generation, we are seeing the big shifts in terms of where will even the opportunities be for all of India to be gainfully employed say by the time India turns 100, right, in 2047. It requires us to have, therefore, a build-up of industry, right? Your productivity of labor needs to go up through infusion of capital in some form. And I think that's where all the hard work is between now and 2047. If you kind of just take that as a goalpost. Education is essential, but not sufficient.
Not sufficient.
Also, just to add, I think we're also moving away from formal education and degrees on paper. It's increasingly becoming a skill economy. Right? So we've had some very interesting startups like Nav Gurukul that came out of our incubator and later accelerator portfolio. We had the good luck of working with them, where they've been able to take someone with a baseline of, say, a 12th pass and turn them into a software engineer within 14 months. Right? You see a lot of hiring happening through hackathons, not because someone has a fancy engineering college degree. So that shift also is a notable trend, and I think that's where the accelerated pace of building human capital starts to become visible.
No, fair point. Now that we've touched upon the problem, what all programs are running and where are we before we can say that India is poverty-free?
So the nudge functions in 3 distinct centers. There's a center for skill development and entrepreneurship. That's where we started creating employability programs for youth. Today, that center has a early stage startup idea for helping nano entrepreneurs in cities. Lot more to come from there. Our flagship is the Center for Rural Development, which started with our work in JarXchange in alleviating extreme poverty. Grew from there to set up a national program management unit with NRLM, the National Rural Livelihood Mission with the Ministry of Rural Development. In the last 5 years, based on the evidence of our direct work in JarXchange, we've helped to formulate, of course, the national policy, but also take the program to 8 states. And now we have teams across these states localizing and contextualizing the model for the needs of those regions, but more importantly, also creating the technology backbone and the readiness for scale, which comes through supporting the state rural livelihood missions to take it all the way down to district, block, and village level, institutional capacity building. The third is the Center for Social Innovation, which I run. Now, if the direct programs of the nudge are to move from being these prototypes to propagating and eventually proliferating to achieve impact at population scale, you need a lot more ecosystem at play, right? You need the ability to attract talent, to bring in the right kind of capital at the various stages of the growth of the initiatives. You need policymakers' attention. You need public attention through, shaping the narrative. And this work benefits not just the direct programs of the nudge, but the larger livelihoods ecosystem. So we see our work as building a thriving livelihoods ecosystem for India, cutting across early stage social entrepreneurship support through our incubator and accelerator, as market making through our prize challenges. There are spaces where markets are not going today. Can you be catalytic in those spaces and make it possible for people to start up and also bring in investors and the right kind of capital to take markets beyond the threshold that they are stopping at today? The Indian Administrative Fellowship is a means to get policy attention to this whole space by placing senior execs, particularly technologists, within government. We could fast track the country's GovTech roadmap, right, and have government come in as a payer at scale for a lot of the innovations coming from the private sector, and fast track the rate at which government programs, upgrade to higher levels of productivity, and leverage of technology. And finally, all of this needs to come together, and hence we convene, right? We bring Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar to the same arena and create, the space for learning, networking, and amplifying each other's work.
Got
So
it.
all of that together is the ecosystem building work in the Center for Social Innovation.
Got it. I'll throw a startup kind of a question. When we were talking to Sridhar Venkat from the Akshay Patra also, I asked one stupid question. What will it take to get India hunger-free? And I want to say, so what we were talking about is that we've solved X percentage of the problem, right? You would get a lot of startup pitches like that. Just hypothetically, if we have to go there, that India is poverty-free, and as ma'am mentioned, that there is government, there is corporates, and then there is social sector.
Yeah.
Where are we today in solving this problem of a poverty-free India? And again, your thoughts on what needs to be done to get all of this together to go there?
So per se, we're still some distance. That's easy. We have, to be fair, as economics changes and India itself lifts on that tide, there will be people who will come out of poverty, right? But at the same time, just as globally inequality continues to grow, so does it in India. And therefore, there will still be those people left behind, especially the ones that do not have any privilege today. The likelihood that they're able to access opportunity continues to reduce rather than grow. Even in that, what will happen is that the middle class will get better and so on and so forth, right? That's usually what the tide is lifting. But just from a solution standpoint, again, I'm going to go back actually to Bill Gates. And I think the social sector exists to come up with innovation. Unlike, say, in the for-profit side, where the corporate sector actually goes out and does that, right? They actually scale the innovation by themselves, and the customer is paying for it, right? Here, there is a proxy customer all the time. So for a while, the social sector will use the philanthropic capital and get the innovation to a certain size, where the proof points have been created, and then sooner or later, for most innovations, the paths, and again, it's not true across, but for a good portion, it's always going to be the government which is going to be the engine to deliver at scale. Because neither one of us, no one in this country, has the ability to replicate the government's delivery system, right? And they already spend way more money on trying to alleviate the problem than philanthropy can ever put together. So in that sense, it's just about, as Sudha said, sometimes maybe higher degrees of efficiency, sometimes technology, sometimes actually getting that innovation in and, growing that. In some cases, there could just be roadblocks from a policy perspective. Some of those could be changed. In some cases, it's just about delivery to the last mile, which the government already has ability to do because they've got structures in place, right? NRLM, SRLMs, etc.
Got it. Ma'am, what's the biggest challenge for Nudge today?
The nudge is at a very interesting point. I suppose you're familiar with the inflection point we had a couple of years ago when we went from being the Nudge Foundation to becoming the Nudge Institute. Two things happened with that change. One was, of course, the more visible sharpening of our focus on livelihoods as a domain. The second is actually a build-up of what Akshay just said, in that if we were to prepare ourselves for the long game, and in our lifetime achieve 2 or 3 large-scale social transformations. And Atul speaks of it with analogies of, just to give a sense of the scale, similar to the White Revolution, or what we were able to see with the DPI revolution that started with Aadhaar, right? If you want something of that magnitude, that brings the extreme poor out of ultra poverty into poverty, and large populations out of poverty completely, then the institutional muscle building is what we started 2 years ago. And in that said, we would work with civil society, markets, and governments to effect the movement of successful prototypes into further stages of adoption, into propagation, and eventually proliferation, where the ideas themselves scale through the participation of a lot more players. Now, if that's the scale of the ambition, then, well, the problems that we face are, across a wide range of issues. The first is, of course, finding talent that would put purpose above profit, personal financial success, and commit lifetimes to, solving very difficult problems. Finding the right kinds of capital, right? And in an environment where the ease of doing good is not particularly high, right? We're a very highly regulated sector that really does not give you all the space you need to be innovative, to be disruptive. And we have to kind of figure out ways in which the spirit of innovation can, survive the need for compliances. The third is getting partnerships with either markets or government, mostly government, because we are in spaces where markets are not sufficiently incentivized. In bridging the DNA gap of government and us as a civil society organization, it's been a very, very interesting journey full of positive surprises, but it still kind of requires you to find the seat at the table and grow in stature through a track record of good work. All of these are challenges, but also huge opportunities, which is what inspires us to jump out of bed every day.
On that note, ma'am, tell us of any impact stories that you've personally seen through the work that you all have been doing for the past 7-8 years.
A lot of our direct impact, ties again back to the ultra poor program, which is continuing to show, 70+% success rate in terms of the cash plus care design, right? Where the program modeled after the graduation approach is about helping these in ultra poor households have first a consumption grant and then means to access assets of production like poultry or goatry, learn the skills to become a goat rearer, for instance, and come out of poverty. The success rate there is 70+%. Nice build-up of evidence that with sustained cash plus care, extreme poverty can be solved. So that's a huge inspiring data point from our direct work. In our ecosystem building work, very proud of now nearly 130 startups whose startup journey that we've been part of. We recently, in August last year, marked the 100 startups milestone, and since then 30 more are in the program. Many of them have gone on to win accolades on the national scale, on the global scale, ranging from the Earthshot Prize to MIT Solve to being picked up by global fellowships like DRK and Mulago. A new accelerator started last year in the UK called 100X, and they picked 8 organizations globally, 4 from India, and all 4 were out of our portfolio. The prize challenges continue to have startups that have very hockey stick growth paths after kind of leveraging the ecosystem of investors, policymakers that we bring to the ringside as they compete for the prize challenges. Administrative fellows have been able to unlock upwards of 800 crores, the first cohort in Karnataka. The fellows' work directly helped to unlock over 800 crores of government spending in their chosen projects, a lot of which continues to actually hit the ground even post the fellowship. So there's a lot of evidence in that we are onto something very powerful. This view of building an ecosystem alongside of direct programs brings a certain vitality to an underserved space. And I think stepping back, that gives great satisfaction.
Okay, any personal anecdotes of impact stories that you've seen in your journey?
No, pretty much the same. It's been more indirect. So yes, our incubator accelerator would boast of ratios from multiplier numbers. Anything that a VC would like, we've got similar numbers in terms of how orgs have grown, but that could just be selection, right? Good stuff, good people in, good people out, similar to the way that the IIMs or most other B schools work. But where I think it makes a difference is when 3-4 years after they have passed out of the incubator or accelerator, they still call in when they are looking for a strategy change because they want to bounce the idea of you, get your feedback. Where on Tuesday, I've already spoken to 3 founders in the last 1.5 days. So that is what makes me think that while we might not be able to take direct attribution for all the growth that these amazing orgs have had, but somewhere we've made a difference in those journeys and accelerated those journeys like we intended to.
Talk us about the incubator. Is it very similar to how we have incubators in the startup world? What does this incubator do?
So again, if you look at it globally, very seriously, you can break down pretty much everything that any incubator or accelerator does, for profit or non-profit, into 3 key things.
Okay.
One is, what's the money at the table, right? So we give between 15 lakhs to up to 2.5 crores up to 2 crores in the incubator and accelerator. The second is, what is the access? Now, this is where there is a slight differential because in access to ecosystem, typically in the for-profit space, this can be a variety of things. It could be access to the supply chain, could be some level of access to customers, especially in B2B, where you could be enabling it. But mostly in the space of nonprofits, where you have to keep digging the well of funding year after year, again and again, it is mostly access to funders. While ecosystem access also happens, but that's the critical component, the funder access. And finally, the most important piece to my mind goes again back to that agency I was talking about, capacity building. Right now, this is where it gets a lot deeper, because traditionally you will have the same kind of knowledge that is being brought in. There will be strategic mentors who will be working with you on product, etc., all of that. But in nonprofits, the challenges get a little bit higher. So as an example, we brought on HR mentors to work with people wearing the CHRO hat. So it becomes a more difficult challenge to solve than in the for-profit startup space. Similar on, say, as an example, in marketing. We have to get a bang out of no buck because no funder pays for marketing.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the challenges get different, and therefore the nuance is a lot higher, and you have to spend a lot more energy on that. But apart from that, fairly similar. From a design principle perspective, not very different.
Not very. Talk about 2-3 of the startups in your incubator program. I've heard a couple of them came on Shark Tank also. Just talk about a couple of them, or maybe your favorites.
It's like asking who's your favorite kid.
What's some interesting space that you've seen?
Sure. So what I've been working on Samuhik Shakti, which is a program where we've got 9 organizations working together for Bangalore's waste pickers.
Okay.
And the nudge serves as the backbone for the entire 9 organizations. So to some extent, we project manage for the donor partly. And one of the partners we've had on is Social Alpha, which also does incubation for us on that particular program. We've now, typically when you say waste pickers, you wouldn't really fit incubation into that. But these are startups that are not focused on, let's say, putting the waste picker out of a job, but actually employ and upskill waste pickers. And for them, it is critical. The waste is in some ways critical. So as an example, a couple of the startups that made it to Shark Tank, one of them is Pad Care, which actually takes menstrual, the pads which is direct biological waste and goes to the landfill immediately. They take the pads, do the extraction, and then make writing pads out of it.
Oh, wow.
They got funded, clearly. And another one takes something that's even tougher. So this becomes, high-tech to some extent. But basically, they take multi-layer plastic and they make designer sunglasses out of it. Again, they were on Shark Tank just a couple of weeks back and again got funded. So we're looking, again, and both of them employ waste pickers. Both of them upskill waste pickers. So it's something, because livelihoods is a critical portion to our mind. So, and again, as Sudha said, it's like asking to pick a favorite child. So I just did Shark Tank right now. But there'd just be so many that I could spend hours talking about.
Yeah.
We can spend hours, but...
So in that count of the 100 plus startups,
Kanji.
all of them are non-profit startups. Okay, so they are not social enterprises. Not so with the Samohika Shakti. There, I think it's largely for profits. But the incubator and accelerator programs are non-profit startups, really going into spaces where there's not much economic, but a pure social or an environmental outcome. Would love to speak about iSTEM.
Okay.
They are in the assistive tech space, helping people with visual impairment to be able to first study and then access jobs using AI. Right? So there's a lot of tech-enabled assistive methodologies to help people in the higher sections of society. But if you kind of go into the poverty segment, affordability becomes a big deal. And hence they've chosen the non-profit model. Graham Hull started off using AI to measure quality of produce in their early years and now have gone into a wide range of extension services / advisory for farmers, bridging the information asymmetry. Right? You have the exact same solutions in the for-profit world where it becomes, power in the hands of the insurer or the buyer. Here it's power in the hands of the producer and hence a non-profit model. Farmers for Forests are doing that in the carbon credit marketplace, helping carbon revenue reach marginal farmers who grow trees on the periphery of their lands. Karya monetizes voice. So they go into communities that speak rare languages required for AI and kind of monetize that almost in a manner where every time the voice asset is used, it creates revenue for the producer. So almost any space where there is a mainstream industry, if you can switch the lens and make it less about the economic returns for the startup in itself, but economic value created that goes as income to the low-income base of the pyramid, I think that's...
This is so interesting. There should be Shark Tank for this.
Yeah.
There should be.
No, I think we should talk more about this.
Because when you kind of look at these examples, it says very loudly that the development sector too needs to be disrupted.
Yeah.
Right? These are the kinds of disruption in every other sector. Why should you have incremental gains in development, 5-10% improvements year on year when you can actually leapfrog and put tech in service of the base of the pyramid, resulting in poverty alleviation not over another 100 years, but in the next 5-10 years.
Got it.
Yeah, one of the first conversations 6 years back that I had was, can we make social, non-profit startups the cool cousins of the startup space? Because typically they don't get the attention simply because they're not unicorns, right? There are no numbers around that. There's no one getting rich, and therefore it gets lost because it's impact rather than wealth.
No, it's a very nice problem statement that you mentioned. It should become cool.
Yeah.
You also mentioned, ma'am, a lot of a lot of these startups are led by women entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Which is contrary to the for-profit sector. Why do you think this is?
I think the non-profit development sector attracts, on average, someone that has far more empathy than, say, the peak of the pyramid, right? Peak of the bell curve. Thrives when there is a certain strong feminine energy. It's less about women, it's more about feminine energy of empathy, creativity, nurturing, deep care for the communities, working with, not for, right? And still being aggressive in terms of growth and scale, right? Scale at a pace faster than the size and scale of the problem itself. And women entrepreneurs have done very well in balancing this and hence have been successful. Right? And you kind of see that from the early stages of becoming a social entrepreneur, usually through a fellowship. You'll find the same percentages of large numbers of women in, say, an acumen-like fellowship. You see large numbers of Ashoka fellows, which is more a later stage lifetime achievement metric, also be women in that whole spectrum. While that is true, I still feel there's a lot of distance to be covered in terms of the workforce in the social sector also having a lot more women. Even at the nudge, we struggle at leadership levels, and I'm sure that's true for a lot of non-profits. At leadership and board levels, the representation is nearly not where it needs to be. So I think it's too early to call it a victory or anything. But yes, very inspiring to see young women stepping out of educational institutes, mid-career women, looking for second careers in this space. It's a wonderful pattern, yeah.
On that same note, there's a question that has come from a friend of mine who works in the social sector. She works in public health for women, and the question is that what are the barriers and enablers for more women in the leadership positions?
I think the nudge has done well to create a space where women can thrive, right? I think, and in that we are seeing career growth for people who join at early and mid-level, not too much disparity between men and women. I hesitate to say that we are in the range where we need to be as far as senior women in the leadership roles are concerned. But we have been successful in, say, attracting very exceptional individuals at their senior stages of their career. For instance, our social entrepreneurship unit is headed by Subhashri Datta, batch of 92 IMCAL. 2 long decades in financial services, starting with ICICI and more recently in boutique credit firms. We have women leaders in both of our early bits in the prototype stage, one in agriculture, the other in urban entrepreneurship. Our head of impact monitoring and evaluation is a woman leader, again, a very exceptional young woman. So it's there, but nearly not where it needs to be. Yeah.
Got it. There's one aspect of how does the social sector get funds? Where do most of the funds come from? Is it just CSR? Or what's the split? How does the funding run in social sector?
So starting out upfront, let's say you start an organization today, a non-profit today, you're eligible for CSR funds only 3 years out. So the first 3 years is either a phase of starvation or you invest yourself.
Isn't that a big barrier to starting?
It is, and it has been challenging. So what you do in that time frame, what some people have figured out, and more people should do, is to look at incubators as an example.
Yeah.
It's a via media. There are a variety of those out there now in the social sector also. Not as many as there should be. I mean, be very clear about that. But there are a lot more. Plus, as the tide lifts, and it's been lifting, there are a lot of Indians out there who've earned reasonably well. They might not be UHNI, they might not have billions of dollars to give out, but they've got a reasonable amount of money to give out. And that is something that people are starting to tap into. And that's really what gets you through that first 3 odd years phase to a reasonable extent, after which you then are able to start to tap CSR. But by then you need to show some impact. If you've actually not grown at all, not done much on the ground, then why would anyone, give you the money from the CSR side? After about 5 to 6 years, traditionally, is when you usually end up applying for FCRA. Some would do it later, etc. It's just typically when you hit it, which is when you're able to access foreign capital. Whether it comes from foreign single funders, especially in the US, some in the UK, typically where wealthy Indians are based, right, NRIs. Some level of funding comes from them, but mostly it'll be coming from foundations, etc., who are looking at India as one of the places that they want to invest in. So that's how it goes. You start with, and I'm not saying that the funds disappear at any time, right? At the Nudge, as an example, we're still trying to open new HNI doors, because very often that capital also does come without too many strings attached, right? And therefore, you're able to build an organization rather than build an implementation program. So that is also something that is really useful for startups at early stages when they get that capital, which is coming from philanthropists, because the taxability, of course, they've got the exemptions already in place, so it is possible to get retail money in.
Is money the problem for social sector? Is funding the problem for social sector?
Yes and no.
Okay.
There are, I think it's not one of the easiest sectors to raise money in, because there is a lot of friction, right, in terms of discoverability of funders. Intermediary ecosystem is still underdeveloped. It's a nascent sector overall. So there are very basic problems of even discovering who is a good funder for this space in this geography for this kind of program. Those problems exist. But what we have seen is, for innovative models that achieve meaningful impact that is sustainable, the money manifests. Right? So the money exists, and it will grow when solutions start to show evidence, bring a certain differentiation in how they deploy the available capital.
Akshay, do you think there is a perception problem in the social sector for the organizations as well as individuals?
Yeah, so...
No, let's be honest. I mean, I have, as I said, I have friends who are working in this sector, and they face this, right? उनको लगता है कि या तो आपके पास बहुत पैसा है और आपने कुछ इसलिए खोला है, right? There is a perception problem. So what is your take on that? I mean, do you face that, or does Nudge face that?
So I can talk about the sector at large. Let me start there. Per se, so there are 2 or 3 things that seem to rule. One is you need to be poor to serve the poor. So at least you need to look poor. So you should not be, let's say, in a large car, so on and so forth, or be dressed to a certain extent, and the typical kurta, pajama, all of that loaded perception of the sector continues to stay. The second one is that you need to be very rich, the one that you spoke about. Logically, you made a lot of money, and therefore, now you are getting into the sector because you want to distribute some, let's say, feel good, and so on and so forth. And the third one is the most interesting, which is everyone's a crook, right?
Yeah.
And
glad you said it before. So let's talk about
it
so
is.
does one need to look like a certain this thing and or portray that kind of image while working in the social sector? I'm so happy that you did not come in a kurta pajama and you're wearing what you're wearing. But tell us, I mean, why is there such a perception and how do you counter that? And does one need to have that kind of a social image?
So
Is it
partly,
coming from somewhere? Is it beneficial to have that?
yes, so partly it came from work on the ground. When I'm working on the ground, if I turn up in a three-piece suit to someone who is, in ultra poverty, we've just created a gap that is not possible to bridge. So it started from the right place because a lot of work that was done in the social sector was work that was done on the ground. As we now also move into trying to get other pieces together in terms of Samaj, in terms of Sarkar and Bazaar, there needs to be some shift in that. While that shift has begun partly here, but it is not something that has shifted in perceptions as yet, right? So that's the differential. I remember 6 years back, the first time I went out to pitch what I was just designing and starting the accelerator at that time. It was the first non-profit accelerator around. And when I went in to pitch to CSR, I remember someone telling me from CSR, that's the first time I've heard someone from the social sector pitch like that. You had a presentation on your laptop and it was all number-based. You took global examples. And so that is why I'm saying there needs to be a slight differential. The same things don't necessarily work for the government or for the sector funders as works on the ground. On the ground, it is absolutely necessary for us to be there, be in the same garb, and also, more importantly, do a certain level of design thinking, right? We have to listen. We're not here to sit in air-conditioned rooms and come up with solutions. But that's where, sorry, I went round a long way, but that's where I think the perceptions began from.
So do you need to have a thick skin to be in this sector?
Absolutely. that I think is, but see, part of that also comes from the fact that, that there is some level of misinformation. And the joy that Sudha spoke about earlier as part of the compensation, right? It just bounces off. If I'm to put it in ancient terms, it's like a kavach, so to say, right? That joy that comes in, and therefore it doesn't, it's all right. That gives you a thick skin by itself.
Ma'am, marketing and social sector, it's something I'm really interested in the sense that you do good, and then when you show you do good, do you get a lot of flack? I mean, how do you leverage the good work that you're doing needs to be told?
Yeah.
Right? So is there a conflict? You say that you don't want to get recognized. I was reading your posts, but how does marketing and social sector work? How do you say that you've done great work when you do great work?
It's not a conflict if you know why you're doing your marketing, right? How do you expect to raise the money that is required to do good work at scale if you don't talk about it? At the nudge, one of the spirits of the nudge we have is purpose at the center, right? Which means do whatever it takes to achieve that purpose. If that requires you to build a strong brand, to tell your story, shout from the rooftops, don't be apologetic about it. You're not doing it for yourself, right? You're doing it because the problem space itself needs to attract all the inputs it needs. It needs people, it needs government attention, it also needs money. What happens if you start to become apologetic or being on the back foot is that you do a disservice to that purpose. Right? So we've kept it fairly simple to say do whatever it takes. Of course, you do it with a high sense of responsibility. You will make your funds go farthest in achieving impact, right? Which always means, given that we are in spaces where there's always a lot more to do than resources to do with, you'll always be short on your marketing budget as well. But that doesn't mean you don't go and raise money for it. A very phenomenal thing in the social sector is just how much goodwill flows to make all of this possible. So a lot of what we're able to do as branding exercises is actually running on pro bono, low bono, and sometimes just generous acts of goodwill, right? In which other sector would, CEOs of large organizations, public officials give you their sound bites for free, right? When we do our annual convenings, we get musical bands who do it as low bono, right? And there's a wonderful performance at the end of a day-long, very intense 40 plus hours of parallel tracks of conversations on poverty, but you get to unwind with great music because the band is doing that low bono.
Is low bono a term?
We came up with it. I don't know if we came up with it. We use it a lot. Right? But you get it at hugely discounted rates. Because it's everyone's way of giving back to society, right? Whether you're a musician or you're a website developer or a journalist, right? I think we get amazing partnerships and shoulders to the wheel by friends in all kinds of nooks and crannies, right? That make wonderful work possible without it being cheap work, right? Without the output being cheap and at low quality, right? Difficult, but very, very worth doing.
Do you find, is there a big challenge in attracting the best talent in this sector? Also, when people come and want to join, how do you identify, what's your process? Are they coming for that right intent, or is it something else? Because again, a question that has come from people that I spoke to, that how do you identify the right talent, and is there a challenge in getting the right talent?
So there is. Let's be, very clear about that. There is a challenge in getting the right talent. It is a challenge that partly seems to reduce every once in a while as we see a spurt of talent. And then as we scale, it again goes away and becomes a larger problem as we're trying to grow. In terms of what we really look at, intent is supreme, right? At the end of the day, it is something that is very clear. So we start off by saying that there will be large cuts to compensation. Have you figured out yourself? And are you okay to take a leap into the sector? Traditionally, this is a function of when someone's coming in from the corporate side. When someone's coming in from the social sector, they already understand that it's more about, because they've already committed to the sector, it's more about having conversations about whether they're in sync with what we need, and then becomes about. So when I hit the nudge 6 years back, I realized that we follow what we call the kick-ass model of recruitment, where attitude is the most important part upfront, followed by smarts, and then followed by skills, which upended the way that I recruited in the first part of my career, which was skills first, followed by smarts. Attitude is all right because we pay for that attitude to be, in sync with what we want. So that was a pretty big change, which also results in something very interesting, which, is very useful in terms of differential kinds of growths that you end up doing, right? So I've, 6 years, I have led an accelerator for nonprofits. I have ended up being head of marketing for the Nudge. I have ended up leading the first collective impact effort in India, and will move on now to working on for-profit organizations from a funding perspective. So 4 very different things. So we have something, and that is because we did not price skills upfront, right? Because we took attitude and smarts and said skills can be taught. Therefore, it became different.
And is retention and churn a problem? A lot of people join and leave?
We've had both. We've had churn, particularly in the early stages of career where people do not have that nest egg. We've lost a lot of amazing young professionals to B schools, particularly international B schools that value experience from the social sector. Because I think there's a real struggle to commit your lifetime to non-profit work at that stage of life. We've also been very fortunate to have some of our very earliest team members still part of the nudge, right? So retention on the tenure side has also positively surprised and, kind of been reassuring that the nudge can be a place where people can do the long haul.
Do people start their careers in social sector? Do you get people whose first job is this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even kids with student loans, in fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you should tell them not to come.
I do. Trust me. The problem is that people, basically it becomes reverse psychology. People join saying, because you said that I should not come, I figured it was a place I wanted to be. So I got a bunch of people blaming me for that.
No, that's the head of marketing speaking now. This is for both of you, one by one. Ma'am, you go first. What's the value of money in your life?
I think money buys freedom. It helps you make choices without fetters of, can I afford to make a choice? So I think I've really valued that, and I'm supremely grateful for the first part of my career that gave me this freedom.
I'm talking to a retiree.
Yeah, exactly the same thing. The fact that I was enabled in the first part of my career to decide whatever I wanted to do in the second stage, or not do anything for that matter if I wanted to. That ability, that privilege is something that money has brought.
Has the value of money changed from pre-social sector to what you're doing now in your life? Pre-40, post-40?
No, it actually probably changed early up, early up when in my 20s, the dream was to build my mother the first house that she would own. That was very different from the dream to then give back partly, so on and so forth. So that did change, but it was more as year after year went by, rather than a switch that flipped at 40.
For you, ma'am, has it changed?
Yeah, so some of us are, besides giving our time to the social sector, also committed to philanthropy. Something called Living My Promise, which says in your lifetime or in your will, like the Giving Pledge, you'll give 50% to charity. And a lot of us at the Nudge have signed up for that. To me, the aha moment was in realizing that your money achieves so much more when it is given away. The value of the incremental gains from wealth lying in your bank account is nothing, absolutely nothing, because even your children don't need it beyond a point, right? Your children want to make their own money, have their own careers. What they need from you is the capacity to have careers through good education, and it kind of stops after that. You're doing them a disservice by giving them too much and taking away, something to work for. The same money, when given away, can actually bring large numbers of people out of poverty, right, into a productive India. And poverty alleviation is actually good for your planet, right? Poverty is one of the biggest reasons for adverse effects on environment, right? When you bring people out of poverty, right, even a simple thing like moving from a chulha to a gas stove, from, being a subsistence farmer to being a productive farmer, using less pesticide to using more advanced forms of pest management. All of these are good for your planet. This is what is going to improve our experience for future generations. And philanthropy actually is the means to create a better world for yourself and your future generation than leaving money for your future generations. Right? So that was a big aha moment, and that came from Venkat Krishnan, who's the founder of Give India and the founder of Living My Promise. He says, give till it hurts. That you have not given enough if it's all in that surplus. You should actually give so much that some of it is a personal sacrifice, and that's when it feels you've given enough. So I think that's something to carry in terms of just how your relationship with money could change.
Could change.
Yeah.
Midlife crisis हो रहा है. No, on that note, thank you so much. I think it was a great conversation from where I am sitting, and thank you so much for your time.